Hey everyone, welcome to Reimagine with Robin. Reimagine with Robin is a live conversation with a leader who's working to reinvent how we interact with the world that we live in, from emotional intelligence to modern sales and more. Before we talk to our special guest, Charlene, today, take a moment and reflect. When was the last time you invested in yourself and learned something new? I find it very hard to just carve out time for myself, but I'm always inspired to always do this. And so I feel like today is the perfect session to talk about it. We're going to reimagine how we cultivate career growth. As a former educator myself, I know very well that learning is lifelong and it extends way beyond the classroom. While senior leaders often have access to tons of developmental resources, from executive coaching to tailored workshops, what about emerging leaders and those of us who are just getting started? Why should companies also prioritize early career learning and development programs? So, our special guest today, Charlene, is a learning and development leader. She is the founder of Material Change, and she teaches professional skills to managers and early career employees globally. She lectures at Duke University and contributes leadership articles to Fast Company and Business Insider and more. Previously, Charlene also served as a senior director of product, leading teams at Google's and many other startups. So, Charlene, welcome to our show.
Thanks, Robin. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. Can you first tell us, a little bit about who you are and what your personal journey was over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm the founder of Material Change, and what we do is help new managers and new grads be successful in their jobs on day one. And I started this because after leading product teams at Google and startups, this is what I really wish I had, both when I began my career as well as when I became a manager and started running organizations. And when I'm not doing this, I love to lecture. I lecture at Duke, and I'm also working on a fiction novel.
Oh, wow. Well, when I first met you, I feel like one, we bonded over Zoom across nail polish, but also mainly because you were so dedicated into helping others and helping teach others. And so, can you tell us a little bit about your philosophy on learning and development in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. So something I tell all company leaders and managers, no matter the stage or the size of the company, is that your top priority is the success and well-being of your people, because you only succeed if your people succeed. And so a big part of that means investing in learning and development, both in the professional skills. These are things like how to communicate, how to resolve conflicts, collaborate with others. And these skills are especially crucial for early career folks to learn. And this is a fairly radical thought, though, because the common practice, as you mentioned, is to really invest in training senior leaders and executives. But I strongly believe that investing in your people from the ground up is a worthwhile investment, and at times more effective for companies, both in the short and the long term.
Well, why do you believe this? Is there an example?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So two reasons here. From a strategic standpoint, it's a great way to really invest in talent development and build a leadership pipeline. So Marissa Mayer's creation of the Associate Product Manager program at Google is the strongest evidence that if you identify and nurture high potential individuals, that creates future leaders. And so Sundar, multiple leaders at Google are great products of this investment. But from a more timely perspective, I really believe that we're facing what I call a professional skills gap crisis. Back in 2018, Jeff Weiner, who was the chairman of LinkedIn at the time, said that interpersonal and communication skills, from his point of view, were the #1 skill gap that existed. And this has only gotten worse with remote work, where almost every person right now who's currently 26 or younger has never known and will likely never know what a fully in-person work environment is like. So that gap is just going to widen even more. And we're already seeing the repercussions of this, where more than half of Gen Z say that their college education did not prepare them to enter the working world. And so the only way to resolve this is through training, teaching these key interpersonal professional skills that make people successful in the workplace.
I mean, even college students went to college during COVID, right? And was all virtual themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they're missing those kind of key experiences where you learn from each other, talk, observe people in the real place.
So I guess what would be something that is important for people to know in the workplace?
Ooh, yes. One thing that comes to mind, it's what I always say is success in the workplace really comes down, it really comes down to one thing, and that's trust. This is trust with our managers, our peers, their teams. But yeah, for something that's as important as trust, serving as a foundation for collaboration, it's not always clear how to do it. Do you have a best guess of what you think it could be?
No, you tell me.
So there are four elements to it. You need to build credibility, dependability, and connection with another person. And all of this, when added up together, amounts to more than your own self-interest. And that's how someone sees you as trustworthy. So when they believe that you're a credible source of information and knowledge, they can depend on you to deliver what you say you will, and they also feel an authentic and open connection. But most importantly, they believe that you care more about others than yourself, whether it's about their goals, their interests, or the goals of the greater team. Because trust is broken once people think you're just in it for yourself. And so this is something that I think is universally important in the workplace, and it's usually at the crux of most challenges of every exec that I coach. And they always say that they wish they had learned this early on in their career. And so this is something that I teach as fundamental to my modules.
Oh, wow. So I guess knowing that is something that is really important. There must be other challenges that organizations are facing when they try to implement programs for learning and development. Especially in this environment where people are joining all across the U.S. sometimes or globally. What are things that you see are challenges, and what are some solutions?
Yeah. So one of the top challenges is really ensuring that learning and development is both applicable and sustained. And so what this means, at least from my perspective, it's about reimagining this traditional 7-20-10 training model that most HR teams use when approaching L&D. And so that framework is 10% should be structured learning, like a workshop or a training. 20% should be learning from others, and this is observing role models, and 70% should be real life on the job experiences. But the challenge here is that this is a complete 180 from how learning is done in school, right? Where a majority of college and K through 12 is structured learning in a classroom. So it's no wonder why so many people struggle in the workplace or when becoming a first-time manager, because you can't learn how to be a good manager just by watching others and blind trial and error. That's really inefficient and also unnecessarily difficult, because you should just be taught the best practices of core management skills, like how to give feedback, how to do a performance review, and then you try that on your own. So organizations should really be rethinking L&D through more formal training that balances both learning from others as well as experiential. So for example, at Material Change, I incorporate coaching in between the trainings, as well as have all the students do stretch assignments where they test out what they've learned, they reflect on what's worked and what hasn't worked, and then we discuss this together both one-on-one and also as a class, and we share feedback on what they can try next.
So when you talk about, the workshops that you lead, what is the experience level that most of the companies actually invested? I know you mentioned anyone 26 and younger, but are you seeing companies actually doing that?
Actually, it's surprising how receptive companies are in realizing this. We usually start with most companies training new managers because they're at that experience level where it's highly needed for their ability to create impact for their teams. And we run that usually as a pilot, and then we move on to actually both their managers, so directors who are more senior to them, as well as their reports. And so when we start at middle managers, then it can go in both directions in terms of experience levels.
And do you see people invest or companies across all sectors investing in this? Or are you seeing it really take up more on the tech company side or startup side, or actually just more established companies?
Yeah, it's also been surprising there. I have seen the sweet spot in tech. It's usually when companies are growing at a really quick, fast rate. So they've reached unicorn status, or they just raised like Series D, Series E, and they're growing very quickly and hiring. I've also seen, and some of my other clients are actually in traditional industries like publishing. And these are companies that are trying to think of new ways that they can invest in their employees in ways that traditionally has not been done. And so I'm really seeing it actually start to pick up across all industries. And that's, I think, is probably due to remote work affecting all industries.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, we at GGV also offer this for our portfolio companies, for a lot of emerging leaders, right, across all of our portfolio, to have certain curriculum that we kind of give out from our platform team. But yeah, I'm glad to see that, it's going both up and down, and people are investing across the board. Uh, the one challenge that I see though is that, like, it takes a lot of time. And so and so how fast do you actually see results?
Great question. I personally look at over a 6 to 1 year horizon, 6 months to 1 year horizon. So I'll always track, right after we teach the classes, and then I give 1 month for them to actually apply and sustain the learnings, and then we track results that way. And so one of the best ways to really actually see the results is, how do they tackle a problem that they wouldn't know how to do 6 months ago? And then I ask them to reflect on what has worked, what are the tools that they can then use, because I always look at my success is if I become irrelevant to them, if I no longer need to coach, if I can give them the tools to do it on their own, and even better if they then become teachers themselves.
Hey, but learning is lifelong. So
Yes. Oh no, absolutely. Absolutely.
it seems like this is a no-brainer. So who actually is the decision maker at these companies that you have to win over to incorporate?
Yes, great question, because this is a very traditional B2B sales model, where it usually will be the leader of a department. So let's say the head of sales or the head of engineering. And they usually will want to pilot it first with their group of reports. And usually if their organization is growing quickly, that's one way. The other way is actually going through the traditional HR department. So the head of people or so. I found that it is more effective to work first with one organization or one department, because then you're able to really prove this. They care a lot about their own individual growth of their teams, and then have it scale then throughout the company.
Are there certain departments that you see like pick this up more? Is it sales? Is it customer support? Any trends?
Yes. Yeah, the biggest trend is actually around engineering. And that's because engineering teams are actually always the biggest. And also that engineering managers tend to be very strong in technical skills, right? That's a key part of their job. But actually, research shows that technical skills is only 1 out of 10 things that managers need in order to be good leaders. There are 9 other interpersonal communication, conflict resolution skills that are more important in order to lead a great organization. And so
I do see the struggle a lot, especially because my husband's an engineer, and when he goes into the office, he will still slack the person that's next to him as opposed to having a conversation. This is so very different from you and me. And many other teams. But all jokes aside, like, engineering does have a lot of also dotted lines, right, to many other departments, whether it's marketing, whether it's working with PMs, right? They're really like the core, and they, as Marie said, see everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're so they're in such a cross-functional role that it's important and essential that they collaborate well. And so that's one of the things that I really drill into in my courses.
So what is another interesting trend that you've learned recently as you're incorporating into your curriculum?
Yeah, one trend I think actually is not taught enough is actually how to sustain performance over time. And so this is especially pertinent for ambitious, high achieving people who want to achieve results and achieve results constantly. But how do you do that without getting burned out, right? And this is not something that I think gets talked about enough. And so what I teach, I draw upon research that I learned at Stanford about how to manage our energy and not our time. Because energy is a renewable resource, whereas time is finite. And this means learning how to manage it across a few dimensions. First level, physical. This is about good sleep, exercise, diet. But the interesting ones are around mental and emotional. So mental is kind of your cognitive capacity to focus and problem solve. And so this comes down to how do you minimize context switching between Slack and email and notifications, and how do you deal with those kinds of distractions. But most importantly is kind of your emotional energy. And so this is your ability to deal with stress or negative feelings or setbacks. This is about building resilience and how do you stop ruminating over your past actions. One study actually from one of my favorite researchers, David Cross, who's a professor at Michigan, he shared that people talk to themselves in their minds at a speed similar to speaking 4,000 words per minute.
What?
And to put this into perspective, this is the equivalent of a 1 hour long US State of the Union address that happens all in the span of 1 minute in our heads. All right, so
okay.
that's a lot of self-talk, and it's a muscle to learn how do you manage this? How do you train yourself to not get sucked into this? Because doing so, ruminating, thinking about something you said or didn't say at a meeting, all of that sucks up your energy and reduces your capacity to perform in the workplace. And so these are some of the things I talk about, introduce in my class, and we discuss strategies of how do you manage it effectively for yourself.
Seems like something I would really want to use. I feel like I walk a lot away from like Zooms a lot and be like, oh no, did I forget to say X, Y, and Z, or did I say the wrong thing? I couldn't really tell because there's so many tiles and I couldn't see who felt what, right?
Yes.
It's really difficult.
Oh, absolutely. And the research also shows that it affects women more than men. There's more of that guilt or worry about how you show up in the workplace. And so that also weighs on your mind. And so some of the tactics I always teach people is to think through what are you able to change? If you can change it, reflect and brainstorm ways to do it. If you can change it, how do you let go and move on to the next thing? And that's kind of, these are just, again, it's like an exercise or a muscle to build. And you do that over time.
And I think even like taking the first step to be self-aware of this all is really important, because sometimes I don't even catch myself doing it, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's also what coaching gives the space for people to do, is reflect and build also that self-awareness of how did you show up? How did your behavior affect others? How is what your environment is? How does that affect you as a person too? And these are all things that we can discuss usually in the space that coaching provides.
I feel like this is very useful even in your personal life.
Oh,
I feel like I need this in my relationships.
Number of times I've applied a framework I learned in workplace conflict or workplace relationships to my own marriage. It's done wonders.
I think you need like a methodology or framework that I can fill out every time I finish a meeting.
Actually, one thing I do, and I do it actually very seriously, but people always joke about it, is I actually do similar to how a business would do a quarterly business review, assess what's worked, what hasn't worked. I do that quarterly actually with my husband.
Oh, wow.
And that actually allows us, the systematic way to work on a relationship. So that's just one example of something every couple or every even a family can do to build great relationships at home as well.
Yeah, one interesting thing that came up recently. So I'm in, a trust circle with other female investors, and one thing that came up in our discussion was actually, hey, let's take a pulse and reflect on all these different aspects of our work, and what's working, what's not, our personal life, our work life, etc., and like score it. But one of the other investors proposed, like, hey, let's actually do this every quarter and actually record our scores, and average it out and see how you change over time. Because like you said, it's not one point in time, right? Like, you actually should reflect upon how you are adapting, how you are changing, how you're growing.
Yes, I love that. I love that. And I always say that because what I'm seeing from this, it's just another way to reflect introspectively. And these are things that journaling provides. These are things that friendships, close relationships can provide, again, that space to reflect openly. I love that. And doing it quarterly, I think, is also very key.
I think any more than that would just be stressful.
That is true. No, I think I have experimented, how often do you have to check in? Is it on a monthly, a weekly basis? I think quarterly is actually the right cadence, where you have enough time to see if anything has changed.
Kind of like parent-teacher conferences.
Absolutely.
So how, we're both in tech. And so I see a lot of startups, from like Gen AI to like in the coaching world, right, to ones that are just completely the very opposite, like very analog. And so, like, what advancements do you see in technology that influence the way an organization approaches employee development?
Yeah. So actually, the way I've seen actually 3 waves that have tried to tackle development, and each one comes with different approaches. If I look back, I think the first wave was the creation of MOOCs, right? These massive online courses like Coursera, LinkedIn Learning. And I think this was great to make training accessible to anyone and everyone, right, in a self-paced manner. But people started to see that completion rates were a challenge because it wasn't engaging enough. So then a second wave started, where people began gamifying L&D or distributing it through smaller doses. So I've seen putting users into simulation games or a joint activity that you do with colleagues. I've seen people creating Slack bots that give tips every week or nudges to try this new best practice. Or there's AI assistants, right, to answer managerial questions or workplace challenges. But I think people have also found that it's hard to make this really applicable or truly representative of the things that people personally go through. So I'm seeing a third wave now that's actually more insights-based and customized. And that's how we approach it at Material Change. What I do with every new program, I always assess each employee's level of knowledge and then track their development and skills over time, like on a quarterly basis. I also ensure that it's not a templatized learning experience. It's a course I'm constantly updating with the latest research in organizational behavior, cognitive science. And I also curate it because, as I said, with AI, with ChatGPT, there's no shortage of content that exists in the world, and there's only going to be more. So I think what's important here is to be able to sift through the fluff and the noise and really pick what's useful, and then structure that so it's provocative, it's introspective, and it really makes people think. And one of the ironies of this is that, this is not the most scalable thing, right? But time and talent are an organization's most precious resource. So if organizations are going to ask employees to use their time to learn, they should really learn in ways that are actually high quality versus what's most cost effective or what scales the best. That's my personal approach to it.
Yeah, I remember all those waves. Both from like a user perspective, but also from an investor perspective. And so very, very interesting times. And I think much more going forward as well. I do want to try some of the simulations, though. I feel like practicing scenarios, right, where like you give the tools, right, and like I'm like, well, you taught me this, but the scenario hasn't come up yet. So
that is true. I think it's a great way for introductory learning, and I've seen cool things that people can do collaboratively through remote learning through those tools. So I think there's a lot still to be explored in that wave.
I guess one last question, because we're about to be out of time, is how can organizations foster a culture of continuous learning, right? And whether it's like learning new ideas, going to conferences, going right, like, but it's also tied to budget, and so if you could answer it that way, it would be really useful.
Yeah. And I think one of the key things here is to really foster continuous learning in the workplace. And so the best thing, and something I teach leaders to do, is normalize feedback, because this fosters a growth mindset in teams, organizations, to be constantly curious of how they can learn and improve. And so tactically, postmortems after every project or a launch, for example, are a great way to do this, as well as community-based learning and story sharing. So for example, in my class, I share human stories. I share my favorite failures from my own personal journey as a leader, someone who's been in their shoes. But I also invite people to learn from each other and share how they have tackled a similar challenge. And so this is really how students become teachers. And so one of my clients, Ricotta, is a great example of this, where I taught the first-time managers, and now they are starting to teach the next generation of junior engineers who are going to then mentor the incoming college interns, right? So it creates a cycle. And so this type of community learning creates a culture where everyone at a company, everyone from a new college intern to the CEO, has a lifelong student mentality to learn both and from and with each other.
And do you actually encourage them to bake in time, on a weekly basis? Like, when do you fit in feedback?
Oh, so I always say there should be a time in every team meeting to kind of reflect and learn. So that could happen on a weekly basis. Postmortems are a great thing to do, every quarter, and especially with every big launch or big project, because we always celebrate and then we just move on to the next thing. But the key is, before you start the next thing, to actually reflect and learn about what are things we have to do in order to be successful, and what are things that we should never do again. And people don't spend enough time really digging into what are the things we should never do again, and put in the right processes to ensure that that doesn't happen.
Super helpful, and so many tactics for us to take away. Unfortunately, we're like just about out of time. I do want to let everyone know that Sabrina at the GGV team has dropped into the chat a couple of the articles that Christine, you wrote. And would you like to share a little bit about each one, just to give us a heads up?
Yes. So one article I wrote was 10 things I wish I learned before I started my career. This comes with tactics that I've really thought about are key tools that people can take with them, whether you're starting your first job or you're starting a new one. And then my latest article came out with Fast Company on healthy habits that every professional should practice. And that one I actually touch on things like energy, which we just talked about, but also gives tactics on how to curate where you get your information, and also how to build a community.
Oh, great. Thank you. This is so timely as we go right after Thanksgiving to have healthy habits, but also going into the new year. So really appreciate you coming to join us today, Charlene. And I think we have a lot more opportunities to collaborate. So I'm excited for that as well.
Likewise. No, thank you so much, Robin. It's been so fun talking to you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.